They said my cabin didn't match the community aesthetic and threatened to evict me. What they didn't know is that I own the land beneath their fancy lakefront clubhouse. So when they pushed me too far, I rewrote their lease and tripled their fees overnight. For 15 years, the lake cabin had been my sanctuary, a modest wood frame home on the edge of Lake Elmsbury. It was where I went to escape the stress of the city. I'd inherited it from my late grandfather, who bought the land in the 1970s, long before the lake became a hot spot for wealthy retirees and vacationers. Back then, there was no HOA, just nature, peace, and the sound of loons over the water. But in the last 5 years, everything changed. A real estate boom swept through, and with it came a new gated development across the lake, Elmsbury Shores. That's when the HOA was formed. And that's when the problem started. At first, it was small stuff. A letter asking me to consider repainting my cabin to align with community guidelines. Then it escalated. Noise complaints when I hosted a barbecue with my friends. A warning about non-regulation fencing because of the wood rail I installed along the bluff. The kicker? They claimed I was violating HOA rules, even though my cabin wasn't even part of their development. Their reasoning? My property visually affected the character of the lakefront community, and since I used a shared access road, they had authority. Then one morning, I found a notice posted on my door. It read, "Due to ongoing noncompliance, you are hereby ordered to vacate your property within 30 days. I laughed until I realized they were serious. And that's when I stopped playing nice. See, what the HOA didn't realize is that while I only use the old cabin occasionally, I own more than just my lot. When my grandfather passed, he left me 12 acres of surrounding lakefront woodland, land that included a 300-foot stretch leased out to the HOA themselves. That land is where they built their clubhouse, tennis court, private dock, and a portion of their community nature trail. Their entire lakeside image, the one they brag about in brochures, sat right on land they didn't own. They paid a pittance to lease it, an old agreement my grandfather signed decades ago for just $1,200 a year. It was barely enough to cover property tax. But now they were threatening me with eviction from my own land. So I dug out the lease, had my attorney review every clause, and waited for the renewal period. It was 3 weeks away. When the day came, I sent them a formal notice. Effective immediately, the lease of the land comprising your community facilities will be subject to new terms. The new rate? $3,600 a month, payable quarterly. Failure to agree will result in the lease termination and the removal of all structures within 90 days. They were stunned. They held an emergency board meeting, called my lawyer, tried to negotiate, but I held the upper hand, and I was just getting started. The moment the new lease terms hit their inbox, everything changed. Suddenly, the HOA that once acted like they ran the whole lake went silent. A few days later, I started getting calls, not threats this time, but desperate attempts to clarify the lease. They tried to act confused, saying it must have been a mistake. One board member even asked if we could chat informally over coffee. I wasn't interested. I told them to put everything in writing. No more surprise notices taped to my cabin. No more fake authority. Just real business with real consequences. They soon realized I wasn't bluffing. Their legal team reviewed the original lease contract and confirmed everything. I owned the land beneath their prized facilities, and I had every legal right to update the terms now that the renewal period had begun. If they didn't agree, they'd have to remove everything they built at their own cost. And that's when panic set in. Word got around the neighborhood. HOA members started questioning the board. Why weren't they told the land was leased? How could they risk losing the lake access and clubhouse they'd paid so much to enjoy? The pressure built, and in less than 2 weeks, I received a formal letter accepting the new lease terms at 3 times the original fee. They thought they could control me. Instead, they ended up begging to keep what was never truly theirs. And me? I just sat back in my old wooden chair on the porch, watching the lake shimmer like always. Except now, every time they used their dock or clubhouse, they paid me for the privilege. So, that's how it went down. They came for me with warnings, fines, threats, and a fake sense of authority. They thought I was just some stubborn old cabin owner who didn't know how things worked in a modern lakeside community. But what they didn't realize was I held the land under their feet. I didn't fight back with noise. I didn't argue at their ridiculous board meetings. I didn't even raise my voice. I just waited, watched them get bolder, and when the moment was right, I hit them exactly where it hurt. Their pocketbook, their pride, their precious lakefront clubhouse. I didn't burn bridges. I built leverage. And if you're still watching, maybe you face something similar. Maybe you've had someone in power try to intimidate you, whether it's an HOA, a landlord, or a boss who thinks your silence means weakness. Maybe you've been told to back down, fall in line, or get out when you know in your heart you have every right to stand your ground. That's why I shared this story. Because sometimes standing up for yourself isn't about yelling louder. It's about knowing what you own, knowing your rights, and using the system smarter than they ever expected. If this story hit home, if it made you smile, cheer, or even just feel a little more powerful in your own life, then go ahead and hit that like button, not because it boosts the algorithm, though it does, but because stories like this deserve to be heard by more people who are tired of being pushed around. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because I've got more stories coming. Real stories, wild stories, and some that will make your jaw drop. From neighbor wars to HOA horror shows to quiet revenge that hits harder than any shout. You'll want to see how the next chapter unfolds. And if you got a story of your own, where you stood up, fought back, or turned the tables, drop it in the comments. I read every one. Your voice matters here. So, yeah, they tried to evict me from my cabin. Instead, I reminded them who really owns the land around this lake. And I tripled their lease fees overnight. Don't just watch the system. Outsmart it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.